listening to? What are my sources? How in the world can I know that the dates I am depending upon to come to my conclusions are correct? Let's begin with a question I get most often that is also the key date that unlocks most of the other prophetic dates on God's 7,000-year calendar. So question 1. How do I know that Yahshua died on the cross on Nisan 14, April 5th, in 30 AD on the Roman calendar? Obviously, there are many proofs of this historically recognized date. But how do I know that 30 AD is the crucifixion date of Yahshua? Now, at this point, I could spend an hour explaining all this and hardly scratch the surface. And it would be worth watching. But please remember, this is a Bible prophecy summary in a very small nutshell. So let's begin. The answer is found in Ezekiel 4, verses 6 and 7. You might want to go and read the entire chapter. Listen to what the Lord told Ezekiel. And when thou hast accomplished them, lie again on thy right side, and thou shalt bear the iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days. I have appointed thee each day for a year. Therefore thou shalt set thy face toward the siege of Jerusalem, and thine arm shall be uncovered, and thou shalt prophesy against it. The time of iniquity prophesied by Ezekiel was 40 years, to be followed by a siege of Jerusalem. The siege of Jerusalem, prophetically in view, happened exactly 40 years after the crucifixion of Yahshua that took place in 30 AD. In other words, the 70 AD siege of Jerusalem minus 40 years lands you or takes you back to the year 30 AD, just as God said it would through his prophet Ezekiel. The iniquity of Judah was the worst crime ever committed on earth, as it was the crucifixion of the Son of God. So the answer to the question, how do I know Jesus was crucified on Nisan 14, April 5th, 30 AD? Well, the Bible tells me so. Question 2, how do I know Adam sinned in the year 3971? In Genesis 1:1, this question is answered in the first Hebrew word in the Bible. I call this the Bereshit Passover prophecy that reveals the first evangelium, the gospel story in pictures, and then based on the Hebrew script that is also Numbers, reveals the time duration in Numbers in the first word in the Bible, just like Isaiah prophesied in chapter 46, 9 and 10. Listen to what the prophet says. Remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is none else. I am God, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, My counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. A word directly from God, spoken through the prophet Isaiah. The numeric time duration revelation is discovered in the word beginning, that is the last 5 letters in the 6-letter word Bereshit, and it fulfills this prophecy. Tav 400 times Yod 10, God's multiplier, 10 being ordinal perfection, equals 4,000. 4,000 years takes us to the cross event. The cross event happened in 30 AD, so we go back in time, 4,000 years, and it reveals the year that the first Adam sinned in 3971. So answer number 2, how do I know Adam sinned on Elul 29 in 3971 BC? The Bible tells me so. Question 3, how do I know that Yahshua was born in 5 BC? Well, this mystery is solved when you understand that the last Adam was patterning his life, death, and resurrection, that's Yahshua HaMashiach, in order to undo or reverse the curse of the first Adam that sinned. Since Adam was created on the 6th day of creation, on Tishri 6, and we know he sinned in the year 3971 BC, let's do the math. The life of Yahshua was about 30 years old when he began his 3.5-year ministry that began in the fall and ended with his resurrection on Nisan 17, 3 days after his Wednesday crucifixion on Nisan 14. April 5th, 30 AD is when Jesus died on the cross. 33.5 years times 365.25 equals 12,235 days. That's the number of days between the birth of Yahshua and his resurrection on April 8th, 30 AD. If we go back 33.5 years, 12,235 days from the resurrection of Yahshua, starting the day count on the Sabbath of Nisan 17, we land on Tishri 6 in the year 5 BC. On the Roman calendar, this is October 8th, 5 BC. Yahshua was born right in the middle of the period of time between the Feast of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement. Isn't that interesting? But what is more interesting is that it is exactly the same month and year that Adam was created on the 6th day of the creation week. Pattern is prophecy. So answer number 3, how do I know Yahshua was born in the fall of 5 BC? The Bible tells me so. Question 4, how do I know the year of creation on the Roman calendar is 4005 BC? Well, the Tishri 6 birth of Yahshua matches perfectly the Tishri 6 creation of the first Adam. Tishri 6 in 5 BC on the Roman calendar in October 8th was when Jesus was born. Discovering the creation date can be calculated now that we know when Yahshua was born in 5 BC and when we know the duration of time and days between Yeshua's birth and his resurrection. We can now calculate when the first Adam was created, and that year also give us the creation date as Adam was created on the 6th day of the first creation week. If we start from Elul 29, the day and month that ends the sabbatical year that the first Adam sinned in 3971, and go backwards in time 12,235 days, we will discover the day and year that the first Adam was created. 3971 BC, going back 12,235 days on the 360 day for a year calendar that God established in the beginning, takes you to the 6th of Tishri in the creation week of 4005 BC. So the answer to number 4 is, how do I know the creation date was Tishri 1, 4005 BC? The Bible tells me so. Question 5, how do I know when the 7,000-year countdown for mankind ends? If we go back to the Bereshit Passover prophecy, we find the answer. The numeric time duration revelation is discovered in the first word in the Bible, the word beginning, that is the last 5 letters in the 6-letter word Bereshit. Tav 400 times Yod 10 equals 4,000. From sin to the crucifixion of Yahshua that happened in 30 AD on the Roman calendar. The Yod 10 times Sheen, 300, plus 1 equals 3,001 years. Going forward 3,001 years from the cross event of 30 AD takes us to the very important future date on the Roman calendar of 3031 AD. The 7,000-year countdown on God's sabbatical calendar also takes us to the end of the millennial reign of Christ, who returns back to his home in heaven at the end of his 1,000-year reign that ends in 3031 AD. So answer 5. The 7,000-year countdown for mankind ends in 3031 AD, and this is also the time that concludes the 1,000-year reign of Yahshua on the earth. How do I know this? The Bible tells me so. If the 7,000-year countdown ends in the year 3031, then we now have a very important milestone by which we can authoritatively answer a couple more questions. So question number 6, when is the second coming of Christ? The answer is 3031 AD, going back in time exactly 1,000 years, lands us on the year 2031 AD. This is the year of the second coming of Christ that begins the millennial reign of Yahshua. Answer 6. How do I know the second coming of Christ and the start date for the millennium is 2031 AD? The answer is, the Bible tells me so. Question 7. Knowing that 2031 is the end of the 70th week of Daniel, we can go back in time exactly 7 years and discover the very year that the 70th week of Daniel begins. So answer 7. The 70th week of Daniel begins in the year 2024 AD. 2024 AD is the year that the 70th week of Daniel begins, ending 7 years later on the Day of Atonement, on a Jubilee year that ends with the second coming of Yahshua in 2031 AD to reign in Jerusalem with a rod of iron for exactly 1,000 years. And so the time of Jacob's trouble ends in 2031 AD. Question number 8. When does the 6,000 years God appointed for man to work come to an end? Going backwards in time 3,000 years from the conclusion of the 7,000-year sabbatical calendar gives us the date for the beginning of the 5th day on God's 1,000-year for a day calendar, confirming that it begins the year after the crucifixion of Yahshua in 30 AD. It begins in 31 AD. To be clear, the fifth day begins in 31 AD and ends in 1031 AD, and the sixth day begins in 1031 AD and ends in 2031 AD on the Roman calendar. And finally, the seventh day begins in 2031, and on the Roman calendar it ends in 3031 AD. So the answer to question 8, the sixth day that the Lord prophesied would be the 6,000th and final year for man to work, begins in 1031 AD and ends in 2031 AD on the Roman calendar. Question number 9. And when did the prophetic 7,000-year sabbatical calendar begin? So going back 7,000 years from 3031 AD lands us on the year 3970 BC, the year after the sin of Adam, the first Adam that sinned in 3971 BC. So check your own date duration calendar, and you will discover that the number of years between 3970 BC and 3031 AD is exactly 7,000 years. I know it looks like it's 7,001, but it's not. This is correct. Remember, we have a problem every time we go between BC and AD, as we have to make a correction. And keep in mind the second proof of this date based on the fact that pattern is prophecy, and so when you go forward 35 years from the creation date of 4005, we land on the end of the fifth and the beginning of the sixth sabbatical cycle, the sixth sabbatical year that begins in the year 3970 after completing 5 sabbatical years after creation date of 4005 BC. So answer number 9, the 7,000-year sabbatical prophetic calendar began the countdown to eternity in the year 3970 BC. It is interesting that the first sabbatical week of years was interrupted by the sin event that took place in 3971, exactly 34 years from creation to sin. And when does sinful man need a Savior? The answer is after the sin of Adam in 3971 that corrupted all mankind and left us without hope until we were rescued by the grace of God based on the finished work of Yahshua as he paid the penalty for our sins on a wooden cross 1994 years ago in the year 30 AD. Does 34 years complete the fifth sabbatical year from creation? The answer is no. But 35 does, as 35 is divisible by 7 with no remainder, further confirming the start date of the Lord's sabbatical 7,000-year calendar from mankind in 3970 BC.